And we're going to start by launching a poll as people are entering. So if you'll please take this poll, please.
Looks good.
Okay, we can close it whenever you'd like me to close
Sure.
it.
Yeah, that's fine. Just kind of a general,
Okay.
get a general idea. Perfect.
And here's the results, just to share them with everyone.
All right, so most of the people on the call are engaged in this work. So great, this will be an interesting share out. Thanks, Anita.
You're most welcome.
So Jasmine, you want to start us off? Are we good to go?
Sure, I can kick us off since we're about 5 minutes in. So welcome everyone. I am Jasmine and I also have Katie here. Just kind of a brief introduction. I'm from Alia. I'm one of the associate directors of learning and I work, we have a few different team categories and I'm part of the workforce well-being team. So we do a lot of work with systems when it comes to their workforce and their well-being. And then we are also we created an anti-racism committee. And so we are both part of that and we are happy to be here. And I'll let Katie do her introduction as well.
Great. So I am going to click on this button and hope nothing happens. If I click this meeting is being recorded and continue, are we good to go, Anita?
Yes, you should be fine. Yes.
Great. Oh, perfect. Because I just want to get a view. All right. Oh my gosh, we're getting all sorted here. All right. I'm just so pleased to be here in this conversation with you. I am Katie Miller, the Chief Innovation Officer at Alia, which is at our organization, we do systems change work in child welfare. And my piece of the work at our agency is kind of in the R&D department, is sort of how we talk about it. However, in this conversation, our sort of roles in that work is a little bit less important than just our roles in the conversation around anti-racism. So Jasmine and I together, along with 3 other of our colleagues at Alia, are on the anti-racism committee. So this is of course the topic at hand. So that's me. I identify as a white woman.
Okay, so this is, we kind of set it up to a timeline. We thought that'd be the easiest as a visual and then kind of talk about each component through our timeline. And you'll notice on the bottom, which is a very important piece of it, it's not the timeline, just our timeline. So we really want to emphasize that the work that we are doing at Alia, this is our chance to share with all of you, but it's not prescriptive. So what may work for us and what we share about what our work has been may not necessarily work for you, but we hope that you can take something away from it. If you're doing the work or you want to start the work, hopefully this can be some insights and observations for you. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about milestones and insights that we've come across in the timeline that you see in front of you. So we'll talk about kind of bumps in the road, challenges that we've faced as a team and personal challenges. And then we'll also kind of talk about where we got stuck and how we were able to shift from getting unstuck and change course a little bit. And the next few slides, Katie will talk about.
Cool, and bonus points for people who recognize the typo on the timeline. Where we want to start here is at an event that we held in 2017, and that was a human-centered design event, and we hosted 150 people, and it was really our foray as an organization into the field, and we put a lot of time and effort into curating this group of people to get the best ideas, and thought quite a lot about having a diverse group of people. However, we didn't think hard enough about it. We weren't strategic enough about it, and we were met with real backlash, and rightly so. We had a group of leaders up front who all presented as white, And there were deep conversations about how is it that the people in front of us might best represent this conversation in designing a new way in child welfare. So that was a case for us that was like, despite our best intentions, things didn't go well. And one big key learning that that came out of that piece was about representation. And we did not have enough difference in our planning meeting. We didn't have on our team to be able to ask the right questions. So that was a big insight for us. Jasmine, you just pop in and add, okay? Next, what happened? Obviously, there's quite a lot that happened in the next 2 years, but really the biggie for us that landed in the anti-racism timeline for our organization was after that an event, we even just tried our dangest to be about equity and consider different perspectives and shift our organization in a way that we wanted to. And here's what happened. We were working on a pretty major publication for us. We commissioned a study on the social return on investment of foster care. And it is really a keystone project of ours. And in the process of doing that, we had already been published. We were writing a second publication about something else, and I was working with that author, and I said, and I was writing her email, and I said, you know what, we need to talk about the disaggregated data, and it's really important that we mention what this looks like in Black and Brown communities, just like we did in our social return on investment. I was searching through it, searching for the word race, searching for the word racism, searching for the word equity, and it was nowhere. We had 100% completely missed it. And I just was like, oh my God. And so we ended up writing a public statement that just said exactly what I just told you. We blew it. It was a big miss. How could we not have seen it? That type of thing, which was then another just kind of a slap in the face for us that said, we need to do a thing about it. And again, that was a learning for us that representation mattered, and we knew that it did. We hadn't made a commitment enough to make that happen. After that, we moved our conversation, or this elevated in the board conversation at Alia. And for the first time, the conversation of what we were calling then race equity was on the board agenda. And so we said, we need to move this from, over here into here as an organization. So everyone at Alia, the staff and board, took the IDI assessment, the intercultural development inventory. And you can pop a little chat in if anyone's ever taken that. I don't know if that's a thing that y'all have done. So we all had, varying sort of scores and assessments. As a team, as an organization, we landed in square in the middle is, oh yeah, great, Krista, great. In minimization, which means that we're pretty focused on sameness and less on difference. So it was, that seems to be reflective of where we were. And that was another kind of step in the direction of at least knowing where we all were. Part of that particular inventory comes with every person in the staff and board. Then in order to interpret the results, it comes with 1 hour of really a kind of a race equity coaching session. So we each were able to develop our personal plans around how might that, then how might you work on the pieces that you need to learn or elevate based on that assessment. So after that, we began, again, what we called then was a race equity work group. So it had very little structure and very little direction. And we just said, look, as a board and staff together, we were a small enough organization at that point, maybe 10 or 12 staff and probably the same number of board, small intimate group of people. We said, look, we just need to work on this together. And what the benefits that we, in hindsight, we're reaping from this particular work group was just that it is a practice. It is an absolute practice. So the race equity work group was an every other Friday, hour and a half. Staff or board can come together. It was a really open conversation. Sometimes the conversations were like, this is what I'm learning as a person. Here's a new insight I have. Sometimes it was, but what is Alia actually doing? Sometimes it was, I think we should do this training. Sometimes it was, but this is white people's work. So it was, we were just kind of all over the board with what we were trying to, with our, topic of conversation. But learned that the magic of that was just really putting the time in. And we didn't know the direction that we were going. We didn't know, are we supposed to make a checklist? Are we supposed to make definitions? Are we supposed to, do X, Y, Z? We're kind of like looking around what other people did. But what we really got benefit from was simply the time spent together. Also, what developed from the race equity work group is that we kept asking ourselves this: what is the work? Like, are we doing it? Is this it? Like, are we getting anywhere? Is this the conversation? Are we supposed to be, doing something else? Is there a prescription here? So we kept asking ourselves, what is the work? So we were really interested in hearing, especially because so many people on the call are part of this, have anti-racism efforts in your agency, would really, really love to hear kind of how you all would describe what is the work of anti-racism. We currently feel like we are really in the work. Now we know we are in the work. It feels like work, at least for our group. It feels like a work. It's like emotional work. It's self-awareness work. It's challenging with each other. It's relationship stuff. We are in the work. But then we just didn't know, is this the work? Or if I'm, if it's too, if I'm feeling like kind of okay about it, does that mean I'm not working at it? Is there other thing we're supposed to be doing? So please, if you would chat what you would describe the work of anti-racism to be. I think it might be developing for us. And would you say, Jasmine? I might just kind of share out sort of what's popping up in the chat. Open conversations, right on. Safe spaces, absolutely. Self-reflection is such a massive piece. Reviewing and adjusting policies to be more inclusive, absolutely.
Okay, so now we kind of, you guys are saying all really good answers and what you think the work is. And it took us a little bit to, and we're still learning, like Katie said. But one of the things we did was, and this actually when we had our first caucus discussion, it actually unfolded when a few of us, I think there was 6 Alia staff who went to a Robin DiAngelo and Resma panel. And if you haven't read any of their work or looked at any of their resources, I highly encourage it. They have really good resources. Robin DiAngelo is known for her book, White Fragility. And we'll be talking later a bit about a connection tool that was created that was kind of inspired and from her book. And then Resma, who is brilliant. If you haven't looked at any of his resources on his website, highly encourage it. So we had our first caucus discussion after that, because the few of us that did go to that panel afterwards, we all met and we were kind of discussing, like, how can we implement this work into our work? How do we bring some of the questions and insights that were brought up to the environment at Alia? And so that's when we had a first in-person retreat in February. And that's when we kind of had the unfolding and beginning of our anti-racism work. And so we had a caucus session, and we were at first a little bit hesitant on the feedback that would come from it, because there's some hesitancy from some people who say, well, isn't that causing disconnection and segregation, having people, those who identify as white people in a group and those who identify as BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color? Like, isn't that doing more harm than good? And so we were kind of like, no, this is actually creating a safer environment for especially BIPOC people, because the white people who need to do more work, it can be more harmful if BIPOC people are in the same room, because not only do then white people rely sometimes on BIPOC people to educate them, which isn't their responsibility, it also kind of puts all the efforts onto the BIPOC group, right? And so we ended up having the caucus sessions, and we had focus questions that really focused on how Alia as a culture currently looks when it comes to anti-racism efforts and where we want to move it to. And so that's when we started the work in February. Next slide.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we talk about what is caucusing, like I said, for us, it's two groups. We have one group that is for staff who identify as white, and then we have another group as staff who identify as, I say, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, or person of color. And we have two groups. And so right now our current structure is that 1 week we have caucusing. So both groups, sometimes questions are the same, sometimes they vary, but we have both groups focus on focus questions, and then they have their own space to kind of digest and process that together. And then the next week we have an all team discussion on what was discussed in our caucus groups. And we're able to kind of summarize the key themes and the points that emerged from our discussions and have a larger discussion on it. And what we also learned that was very important, and when we had our all team discussion, was that we as staff, especially at least one person from each group, needed to say back what they heard from the other group and affirm and validate what that group said. We did not practice this in one of our all teams groups, and it actually led to one of our stuck areas, because we weren't able to, in that moment, interpret the messaging correctly. And so then it kind of unfolded in this miscommunication. And so from there on, we were like, okay, we need to continue practicing and implementing our affirming and validating each other in order to avoid that mishap. And so we do that an hour and a half for every other week for the month. And we're able to do this, one, because the reason we do this is because we're able to that's how we identify important themes and key points in order for us to have further conversation and go further forward in our anti-racism efforts.
Mm-hmm. And just, we learned that lesson from not doing it. The first time we caucused, it was so awkward. And it was like, we had all the, people of color in our organization and the white people. And it was the first time that we had said that the people of color were, well, I mean, I guess that we both, but especially our BIPOC colleagues that were given the opportunity.
What did you do?
What's that? Oh, I wonder if there's somebody on mute. Oh, off of mute. But we're able to reflect back and it's like, this is our experience here. And then, the white people were just like, I mean, it was so sad. We didn't really know what to say. And then it was kind of, and then, our colleagues were just like, okay. And we just sort of ended it. We were like, let's get out of here. And so then we needed that. It was so clear, like right from the get-go, from our first practice, it was like, we need to have that like sharing out. And I mean, it feels like therapy. I mean, it's like that. Did you hear me say this? This is what I'm saying. Yes, I heard you say that, this like reflecting back, because it was so necessary for us to have that that like, yes, I heard you. Is this what you said? Yes, it is. Great. And then move on to the discussion another time. But we sure learned that right out of the gate, that it wasn't necessary to reflect back. Right, Jasmine?
Yep. And we also kind of learn too, especially for all team discussions, we start with a grounding exercise. And we noticed that was very important because a lot of people came in tense and it kind of set them up in the stressful mode. So we do a quick kind of body scan of where are you at? How are you feeling? How can we kind of center and ground each other in order for us to really be authentic and vulnerable with one another? So we do that. And then we also learned throughout kind of the unfolding of this process that we needed to kind of understand that people are at different levels of trust. And in order for people to kind of build that trust, we open different types of communication tools. So we have a tool set up where if people feel right now, if their comfort level is that they don't want to be pinned to a statement, they can do the anonymous feedback cloud is what we call it. But we obviously always encourage courageous conversations to be able to have those brave conversations with one another. And we also, with our committee, we say like as a committee, our responsibility is to be there and hold the space for people if they want to come back and give us feedback or if they have a concern they want to talk about. And we also understand that some people do well in large group discussions and some people do well in better in small group discussions. So we also have multiple platforms for people to put their insights and reflections on so that the team can still learn from them if it takes them a little bit of time to come up with their kind of communication piece of it. And I think the last point I'll make here is we also created a group agreement. So, because in the beginning we were kind of struggling, like, how do we show up vulnerable? How do we know that what we say won't be taken and held, like a grudge will be held for the rest of our lives? How do we know that I can fully trust being my full self and that you will have positive intent on what I mean. And so we created group agreements and we created them together and we said, kind of speak your truth. And then people who are listening to assume positive intent, ask questions, have courageous conversations, be vulnerable. So there's about probably 10 of them, but that really helped guide us and set us up for our future conversations.
And I think that you touched on it, Jasmine. There was a question in the chat: was participation mandatory? And I think that yes, but not everyone has to participate in the same way. We really, like Jasmine mentioned, make it available for different ways to share and speak and ask. And after every conversation, we use a Microsoft Teams as a internal platform. And so after every conversation too, we do a written reflection in Microsoft Teams. So everyone goes there and just says whatever it is, like, this is how I was feeling in my body, or this was a question I have. And we really encourage also half thoughts, because that's the thing that, so we hear that all the time in our group. Is like, well, I was kind of thinking this, but I didn't know how to say it. And so that's the really vulnerable piece. And so we've talked a lot about say the thing that isn't developed yet, because that's what's so real. And then of course there's conversations about trust and safety. And I mean, I think that's coming up. I don't want to jump the gun here, but there's just we've talked about the difference between, of course, safe and uncomfortable. Like, what if you feel like you weren't safe enough to do that? We really lovingly challenge each other to be like, what is that? What is the piece that you're not safe about? Like, what isn't the safety piece, or what is the thing that you think that you're not supposed to say? Kind of playing that out, because we just have it in our mind of, like, just looking stupid or feeling stupid is not unsafe. You know what I mean? And so we've just had to challenge each other and ourselves very lovingly to participate. Should I advance, Jasmine?
So this is another poll, and the question is really, like, a majority of you said you're doing anti-racism work already. So this question is, in your anti-racism work currently, or maybe you've done past anti-racism work, have you experienced caucusing? So if we want to launch that poll. Here, I think I might be able to do it. So now it looks like it's flipping. Majority is saying no so far.
Cool. That's probably good. And we can show the results. Yeah, that's interesting. Yep.
All right. So let's share results. So this is currently where we're at with everyone here today. 66% said no, while 26% said yes, and then 8% said not applicable. So let's do that. Next slide. So then this kind of brings up, so our anti-racism committee, which was formed in March, so shortly after our retreat, that first retreat we had. And it really came about where from our retreat, a lot of people really opened up and they were extremely vulnerable, which was very surprising because half of us were also very new. So it was very interesting. And people, there was emotions that ranged from everywhere. But I think we all had in common when we were leaving our anti-racism work, we were all very tender because of the vulnerability and how people showed up. And so that's kind of how it ended. And then like a few weeks later, we were kind of like, okay, are we gonna follow up on those conversations? What are we gonna do? So we were kind of left in this limbo, like in this mid area of, we were all super vulnerable and we were all very open to each other and trusted one another. Now, where do we go from here? And are we gonna go anywhere from here? And so we kind of, in one of our team meetings, were discussing ideas and solutions, which then it came about to have a committee specifically to kind of have the responsibility to help usher the work forward when it came to our anti-racism efforts. And so in this committee, there was a few things that we need to decide, which was how many members did we want from staff to be a part of it, which we had to make that decision too, because there was about 50% of staff that was interested in being on the committee. And we were just like, it doesn't quite make sense to have half of us be having the conversations in the background to bring it to the other 50%. And so we kind of decided, like I said in the beginning, we have different teams through Alia. So we have a no team, which is kind of clinical trauma work. We have a build team, which is, I get the build and B team confused.
Our build is the admin. Yeah.
And then our well-being. And so we kind of said, why don't we take a person from each kind of team that we have through Alia if they're interested, and then form our committee that way. So that's how we formed our committee. So we ended up having 5 people on the committee, and we still have 5 people. And we kind of also talked about representation. Like, obviously it can't be white dominant because they can't be driving the anti-racism work. And we also need BIPOC voices because that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to include the BIPOC voices in the work and create the anti-racism movement. So that's when we kind of created that. And then we had our first meeting as a committee and decided kind of what we were under the impression of the responsibilities we hold as the committee. And we all kind of agreed that our main responsibility was to kind of bring forward themes that emerged from our conversations while being able to move forward in our work. And recommendations if people bring up kind of a question to us. More recently, it was kind of brought up on looking into titles and how, because I missed at the beginning. So I identify as Indigenous. I am Native American, and I'm enrolled in the Cheyenne River Sioux tribe, as well as tribally affiliated with Red Lake. So the titles we have with chief in front of it is obviously very different for what it means to me versus what it means to perhaps white society. And so we're kind of having that discussion. And so that's kind of a topic that was brought up that the committee can kind of discuss and say, these are recommendations, bring it to the staff and have further conversation on it. So we really the committee is really, we kind of debrief our conversations, talk about what stood out, the important themes that are important to Alia as an organization, that can help move us forward to directly reflect an anti-racist movement and culture.
Yeah, and we're just spending a lot of time, I mean, really so much internal. And we are, I mean, we'll get to this in a bit too about sort of where we're getting stuck a little bit, but we are, sometimes we're just like, we should set some anti-racism goals, and what would those even be? And we sort of, have, kind of dance around different things and really have felt like we don't know what those things are necessarily, but what we do know. And so where we really are focusing our time is just in internal work. I mean, it's how are we together? How do we challenge each other? And how then might our anti-racism efforts sort of just flow from that. And so we still will, do some goal setting and benchmarks and, evaluate that type of work. But at this point, we're just working on our internal, like, kind of trust currency, and what does it mean to be an racist organization, and what does that require of each of us individually. I know that in the chat, when we ask, like, what is the work, there is certainly a mix of, it's like interpersonal work, like each person has to show up in a way that's like, you got to do your own work. Like, you got to know be able to say, like, what is my racial identity? What am I bringing to what are my biases? Not that you have to know them all, but you have to know you have them. And then there's like this interpersonal work, like, how are you together? Like, where do you miss stuff? What do you assume? What do you, is everyone here that should and could be here? So there's that interpersonal stuff. And then of course there's, loads of external work, but we're really kind of in the internal, interpersonal, stage. And there's people chatting. I don't know if you can see it, Jasmine, but what platforms did you use for the anonymous sharing? I forget what that's called.
The platform we use is called Polls Everywhere. You can do like different types of polls, but one of them you can have like an open-ended statement question or statement and have it as anonymous. So people just type in what they need to, and it goes to what we call a feedback cloud.
Mm-hmm. And so it's just been one time that a colleague has used that, but they have also used, different people have come to a person on the committee and given feedback or had a question anonymously. And so then what we will do is bring it to the committee anonymously and say, we have a colleague that is, I forget that particular thing, Jasmine, but I have one of our colleagues is feeling, something about, we've lately been talking quite a lot about leadership. So a lot of our conversations have been around leadership and representation, and do we trust that leadership can make the anti-racism, racist, decisions. And so that's a big one right now, and it's very vulnerable when you are. How do you say to all the leaders on, especially in a smallish organization, we're 20, like, I don't trust our leaders to make anti-racist decisions. That's very tough to say. And so we then offer those different ways to give that feedback, but it does eventually come to the group, and we then too, of course, would encourage that person or people to be able to bring it to the team. Wouldn't you say, Jasmine?
Yeah, and we also tell the team kind of like, especially with the anonymous, if they use that tool or if they come to us, we kind of say, like, we're keeping track of everything, and as they are relevant to the conversations and themes that come up as a larger team, we'll incorporate it that way, so that it's not random and that person doesn't feel kind of still, pointed out.
I'll advance the slide, but Jasmine, there's also a question about examples of the questions of the caucuses and the team meetings of the topics.
Okay, let's see if I can remember some of them. I mean, our first caucus that we had was reflective of how Alia currently stands in the eyes, for the BIPOC group. That was the group I was a part of, but it was how Alia stands in the perspective of a BIPOC individual, how Alia represents themselves. So from when we look at Alia from a BIPOC perspective, how are they, if they're touching any of anti-racism kind of values, currently doing so? And if not, how can they, how would we like Alia to present itself to external partners and to ourselves? Mm-hmm. So that was one of the questions. One of the questions I think we'll get to in a bit actually was, can a organization become anti-racist with a majority white leadership? And so having that question in the different groups and coming together, discussing that. And then we'll probably answer more questions, or there'll be more questions. I don't want to jump the gun here.
Should we?
So, well, yeah, we can go on.
Okay. So I kind of touched on this, a moment ago, that, when we've talked a lot about, like, what is the work? Are we doing the work? Is there more work to do? Are we missing something? Do we need to go back? We've sometimes felt like, like, are we still, do we still need to do this process? Like, are we still, should we stay here longer in this be like, do we trust each other? It feels like we've been having these conversations for a long time. And we step out into things like, leadership, and sometimes it gets theoretical because I think that's safer. Be like, can an organization that's majority white leadership be anti-racist? Which is a different conversation than, can our organization be anti-racist with a majority white leadership? And if it can, how might you even do that? And if it can't, what do we need to do to make it? And it, so those are tough conversations. And then, we sort of talk about that other stuff, and inevitably sort of come back to like, are we able to do this? Like, do we trust each other? Can I say what I need to say? And some of us are newer to the, conversation than others. And so just, we're all kind of gaining fluency and comfortability with the conversation at different levels. And so while we want to, like, encourage each other gently, everyone's got different ways to participate. Our own business, our own chisel comes up all the time. It's like, I feel like crying, but I'm a white lady, I'm not supposed to cry, and I got to do that somewhere else. But do we trust each other enough to cry? And, all these kind of things. And so it's like, it's all this, like, whoo, I don't know if you guys have that same, experience in your organizations, but it is a lot. It is properly work. So we can advance to the next slide.
So a lot of what we've been incorporating too with our work is presenting racism as trauma. And we, especially with, all of our work is child welfare, and working on improving that system, or I guess that's also the bigger question we're trying to figure out, but is to really build off of that. Racism shows up as trauma, especially in families, communities, and children of color. And so understanding that as an individual, kind of doing your own self-awareness check, like how does it feel in your body? And understanding that when we show up to do this work, it's going to activate things in people, and it's going to show up differently within each of our team members. And that's when the vulnerable moments come in, and staff, they share sometimes how it's feeling to them. Recently, we've kind of been expressing like, your statement activated me and I'm reacting in this way. And we'll later on talk a little more about what that looks like from the tool. But we really want to focus on, one, being self-aware, understanding that Katie mentioned, safety versus discomfort. Are you feeling unsafe or are you feeling uncomfortable? Because if it's uncomfortable, then you're exactly where you should be in this work. And so, or even the opposite, if someone is talking and you have an automatic reaction of kind of going into protection mode, or like, which looks like defensiveness, guilt, shame. We'll go into more factors later, but how do we move you from protection mode into connection mode? And how do we kind of compassionately invite you in so that we can better connect versus going into your own shell into protection mode? Mm-hmm. Next slide. So this is the tool. Katie, I don't know if you want to talk more about it or.
Sure, and we'll send this out. This has been just a real help to us as a team. Especially, I just love page 2. So the side on the right here is like, especially the script. When we're having these conversations, like if you hear yourself saying like stuff like, that's not how I meant it, or why did you wait so long to tell me that, or it's just this is how we can fix it, like really quickly. That's just an indication that and this is really a lot mostly for white people, I think, but that it's like, how do you, those are indications that we're just in self-preservation mode. Like, I can't handle this is too hard for me, I don't feel like I'm getting the benefit of the doubt, those kinds of things, which just doesn't advance the conversation. It's just it doesn't get us anywhere. And so how then, as for ourselves and then for each other, how do we take a moment and it's like pause through that reaction, which is often very physical, and say, okay, maybe that's true. What would that mean if that were true? Maybe am I not seeing the whole story here? And then you're moving into these questions for reflection. So it's really been helpful to have this kind of reset the script sort of piece, and we all know it. We all know it and use it and see this. And so then we can say, I wonder if you're feeling a little bit defensive about this. Is there a way that we can connect around it? So it's a language that we, can use and understand together about how we are because inevitably we kind of, sort of gear up and get protected around this. Do you want to add something to that, Jasmine? Or does anyone have any questions about this? Or does anyone do something similar?
I think I would just add kind of the two popular ones that seem to be happening, not necessarily within Alia, but kind of overall, is one, the protective factor of moving to fix it mode, to not really sit in the discomfort and sit in the work, but to kind of move automatically, and this is kind of what unfolded in our first caucus, is like the BIPOC group kind of summarized and shared what our conversation was. And then the white group was like, okay, well, what can we do to fix it? Like, what are the solutions? And we kind of learned from that, of course. And so avoiding fix it mode and understanding there's a lot of work, like that onion showed, you have to address the core before you can move all externally to the other components of an organization. And then the other part of it was a lot of kind of being in protective mode of the idea that as a white person, since you don't treat people poorly and you're not a bad person, that doesn't make you, this doesn't apply to you. So you kind of just go to your protection shell and kind of will be engaged as an overall team, but not necessarily your personal work.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what the question, as we stated earlier, is it possible to be an anti-racist organization with a majority white leadership? And that's a big question. And this is kind of a question we kind of got stuck at. We kept revisiting this question and having conversations and kind of going in this loop. And so eventually we were like, okay, the committee kind of was like, okay, we keep kind of going through this revolving door. We just keep visiting the same conversation, having the same conversation. How can we move forward? Because as the committee, our one of our responsibilities is to help usher forward. So we dissected it a little more by saying, okay, by asking both the groups, what components of a leadership team need to be there in order to reflect an anti-racist leadership team? And what kind of unfolded from those conversations was, one, the individual representation and process. And it was this idea that representation, we all agreed, yes, is very important to be to represent in a leadership team, to have BIPOC voices included in that. There was varying degrees of the balance of what that would look like, but it also, we all agreed that it goes beyond representation. You can't have a BIPOC person on there just to have a BIPOC person on there. It depends on the individual as well. Their leadership style, does it align with the organizational values and the culture? Are they self-aware, and are they emotionally intelligent, and can they understand their biases and do their personal work, as well as engage in conversations and understand when they're being activated and reactive? And then process, which is what processes do we currently have in place that aren't necessarily inclusive of the BIPOC voice, and how can we further create inclusive processes to include the BIPOC voices, and what does that look like, and which ones are important? We talked about, our hiring process, and understanding, some of the current concerns with the hiring process in general seems to be kind of like a white framework, with the credentials of being licensed, having your master's, having 6 years of professional experience, and just kind of going through all of this criteria. So that alone in itself can be difficult to hire someone. And then you want to take from a pool where someone who identifies as BIPOC is going to be even smaller. So even having those conversations and looking at our processes internally and saying, how can we make this so that it's not a white framework, essentially.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so we've been just really kind of, getting brought back to these three sort of, pillars, and how do you work on each of those things? If you have a majority white leadership, what is your plan? What is your plan? I mean, do you just replace people, or is there some sort of succession, or what is the plan around that? We're in the middle of that right now. And then as individuals, like, how do we make sure that each individual that's on the leadership team, we trust their perspective? And then, like Jasmine said, processes, like, if you are a person of color at this agency and you just happen to not be in the meetings where stuff gets decided, like, where can you even provide your input? So we are really looking at making sure that that it's just not the case that the experience is like, I didn't know that was happening, or I would have liked to talk about that, or I don't, you know what I mean? So we're just looking at where do we even make decisions, and how can we make sure that there's input from everyone? Should I go with this one, Jasmine?
Go for it.
So as you can imagine, there's lots of tensions that show up. So I mentioned earlier, like, we spend a lot of time on process. Is this the work, or are there some outcomes we should be pointing to? And then, so many times we've said too, is like, man, this is very personal work. Is this something that I should even be doing at my job? Like, this is so real and raw and vulnerable. And a lot of us, maybe haven't even talked about this with your families or your partners, like, really digging deep. And it is so personal, and it's so essential. So it's a part of our professional work. And then, internal, external as well. Like, what do we do that's just in our team, and where does that kind of look outside us too? I think I'm going to just move through these a little bit quickly. We're getting a little bit to the end, and I'd love to hear from other folks as well. But this moves into like what we're learning. And go.
Yeah, so we'll speed this up a little bit in short snippets, because we of course want to have a discussion with all of you as well. So supportive leadership. So the leadership, of course, has been very supportive in the work. And I think one important component too is on the committee, it's not leadership driven. It's obviously as a committee, and Katie, she started there as our kind of, we call her leadership liaison, because it's still important to have her engage and be a part of those conversations, so that she can kind of be that liaison person when it comes to leadership discussions and the committee discussions. Because consistency, we talk a lot about trust. And as we know, trust is consistency over time. So making sure that you're being consistent in the efforts that you're doing with your anti-racism work has been very important to us. Safety versus
Yeah, can I say a note about Amelia? So Amelia Frank-Meyer is our CEO, and what she has had to do as well is start her own kind of group for other leaders. Is like, she had sort of, then realized, even different than our leadership team, but at CEO, like, she just can't do the work, like, not all of the work with us. Like, there's just some stuff that she needs to be able to, like, have her own space for. And so she had the wisdom to, like, develop her own kind of professional group where she can just be herself. So that was a really important piece of it too. Sometimes you just can't do all the stuff in front of all the people.
And then I think the other thing we kind of touched base on, like, yes, representation matters. And as an organization, we decided that self-awareness matters, to really understand and be aware of yourself when you show up to these conversations. And then of course, safety versus discomfort. Make sure that in conversations to ask yourself, is it really your safety that's at risk, or is it because you're feeling uncomfortable and that's getting a little bit confused? So. And then, of course, this is our biggest takeaway, is this work happens in trusting relationships, period. So we continue to show up for each other. We continue to have courageous conversations. And in the end, that shows that everything is still okay. We're still a team, and we can continue to show up with each other. And that's really at the end, when it comes to our overall work, we realize that as a group, by showing up for one another, we're able to advance in this work because of the personal work also being done outside of our group work. And then I think this is now moving, might be one of the last slides, but this is one of our chat questions. If you currently do anti-racism work, practices you currently do to build an anti-racism environment, work culture, or if you aren't doing the work yet, maybe you've thought of ideas you can bring back to your work. You can answer those in the chat. There's a question how we can reach you for further questions. We have a slide at the end with our contact information that you can reach out to us.
Yeah, we'd love to hear what you all are up to too, because I know, we're in it, we're right in it. So it, like we said in the beginning, it's a how we, not a how to. So we've really leaned into the caucus work that has been so meaningful for us. And there's a few other things I forgot we were going to mention. We had a couple of times, like had a speaker come, and we just really thought that we might need like an outside person to do a thing, and that was fine, but it didn't really like resonate with us that much. And then in the beginning too, like we were just like doing some reading about how do you do this, and it seemed like I was like, well, we need to have some sort of shared definition. So we did all this work on how do we define racism? Like maybe we just need to make sure that we're all have the same meaning to the words that we're using. So we wrote this shared definitions, and that was fine, but it didn't do much for us, frankly. And so so there was just sort of this part of like, I know that there's other, groups that are farther along, or that looks like, than we are. And so we're trying to gain, inspiration and learning from them, and did some of those things, and then just did some of our own stuff as well. So please write your wisdom in the chat and your questions. Oh, great. How do we instigate anti-racism work in the first place? Does it start as a conversation? Well, I mean, I don't know how like it should be done, but for us, it really happened with just a dedicated time to whoever wanted to. It wasn't, mandatory. It was just like, I think this is something that we needed to talk about. And so we just put time on the calendar, said this is a anti-racism discussion. And it was real interesting to just practice. This is just feels like to us to be like a skill too. It's like or Resma Menachem, he's like always, he talks about get your reps in, it's just like a practice. So I would maybe start, and Jasmine, you'll have other thoughts on this, but I would maybe start with just that. I mean, a dedicated time to whoever's interested, and just like, what would we even talk about at our organization? How might that look? What do we want it to look like? And it just sort of evolves.
5 minute meeting, just a heads up.
Thanks.
I would completely agree, especially because that's how our work started. I mean, it started with a group of 5 or 6 of us attending this panel on anti-racism. And then we were like, we got to do this. And so we kind of took a stand. Not really. We have very supportive leadership. But we kind of got together and said, like, can we make this a part of the retreat agenda? And we thought we were going to maybe get an hour, and we ended up getting, I think, a whole half day. So it really just starts, I think, to just make that droplet in the ocean and make the ripple effect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Amber posted in the chat, they're starting with how to read Ibram Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist. Like, what a great way to do it. So this is just what I said, before. Like, we're not trying to say how to, but it's just a work in progress, and we're pretty open about our stumbles and our challenges and what's worked well for us. There is also, and we'll share this as well too, there's some work by a group in, what county was it in California? I wish I could say it, but I won't remember. Tema Okun was the individual who kind of led this effort. There's a document called White Supremacy in Organizations, and it was in a human services agency, and it lists ways that, in kind of values and what it looks like in an organization when white supremacy values are upheld. And that's been a little bit of like a gut punch for us too, because it's like, we do that, and we do that, and we do that. So we've been so, blessed. And I mean, I think maybe it's, because of how open I think we are about it, but we just have had a lot of people just say, I'd love to help you out with that, or let me know if I could, support you in that. People have just been so dang supportive. And so kind of a colleague sort of via shared this with us, and we are kind of in our next phase of the work, would you say, Jasmine, are going to be drawing more inspiration on, that piece of work? Like, what does it mean to, what is it just how we do things here? And how is it in ways that we are really holding up white supremacy values where we don't want to be? So. The question in the chat is, are you doing this on your own or do you have a consultant? We do not have a consultant. Do we, Jasmine? I mean, we have a pretty dynamite board. We have one of our board members in particular is he is a trained IDI assessment specialist. I don't know what the word is, and he has an organization around facilitating these conversations, which is so awesome. But he hasn't. He provided a training, I think, for us maybe in like fall of 19, maybe a year or so ago. But they're just like super supportive. So we don't necessarily, but are real open to and wonder if we might get to a point where we're just not able to keep advancing. But it feels like kind of collectively that we're moving in a direction that feels right. Is that right, Jasmine? And so haven't yet. Are there any other questions or comments or challenges for us? You know, things for us to think about. I just feel a real camaraderie with the lot of you that are on here that are trying to do this real tough work with people that we work with. I mean, I say this all the time, but sometimes I just feel like I get paid to just like be a better person, you know? So I wonder if you guys feel that same way. I'll just leave you with, here there's we've got some events coming up and would love for you to join us for some other things. I'll just advance the next slide and give you a big thank you and let Jasmine wrap us up.
I don't know what to wrap up. Yeah, feel free if you got the PowerPoint. It looks like Anita said all the materials are in crowd something. But feel free, our contact information is on that slide. Reach out with anything you may need. Happy to have conversations. And of course, always biggest warm gratitude from us at Alia.
Huge warm gratitude and our blessings to you as you continue in your tough, really necessary heart work that's anti-racism.
Thank you both very much. It's been wonderful to have you. And I'll say Wado and Moto,
up to the
native
table,
languages, to you both. And if I could ask that all of the participants, if you'll please complete a survey. The survey, if you go into Crowd Compass and go to the survey hub, just find this session and provide us some feedback about it. It will help us to know what kinds of sessions to offer next year if we do this again. So again, thank you very much. Appreciate all of your help and work.
Thanks, everyone.
All right. Take care. Bye.